So, Baron Seeger at the World Food Programme USA described today's panel as distinguished. Let's meet the panel. Hello, Martin. Hello, Andrew. Hello, Volley. So good to see you. I'm going to get you to introduce yourself to our audience. Tell them who you are, what you do, what you're bringing to the table. Martin, you start.
Well, thanks very much, Femi, and a pleasure to be here. My name is Martin Frick. I'm the deputy of Dr. Agnes Kalibata. Agnes is the special envoy of the UN Secretary General for the UN Food System Summit that just happened. I myself, I'm a diplomat for 25 years, a human rights expert and one of the founding fathers, if you so want, of the UN Human Rights Council, which brought me in 2007 to the human face of climate change and really to climate justice. What you now see, and countries that did least for climate change are most affected, including famines. And so from climate justice to climate, and from climate necessarily, I would say, to food, because food is our interface, the make or break for the SDGs.
So good to have you on board, Martin. Also great to have Andrew with us as well. Andrew, introduce yourself to our international audience and what are you bringing to the table?
Well, thank you for being here. It's an absolute honor to be included with this distinguished panel and to be able to talk to everybody today. I am new to social justice activism, only been doing it since I was about 5 years old, thanks to some very socially aware parents. And a lesson plan for life that includes helping people as its priority. Many people know me from my TV work. I own a production company, a marketing business, and a hospitality company here in Minneapolis. Produced and starred in a series we did for MSNBC called What's Eating America, which really upped the ante for me. And I believe that food holds the secret to all of our solutions to our social problems globally, and I'm excited to discuss those today with you and Volley and Martin.
All right, Volley, so good to have you. Introduce yourself to our global audience and what specifically you bring into this conversation.
Thank you very much, Femi, and everyone, distinguished guest panelists. It's an honor to be together with you all. My name is Voli Carucci, and I'm fundamentally a farmer. I am an agronomist by background. I became an environmentalist by choice, and been in the field for close to 30 years, starting in the Sahel, then to the Eastern Africa region, Asia, Myanmar, back to the Sahel. And then in the last months, back to Rome, back to base. I'm an Italian. And it's... everything is about food at the end of the day, as you said, and food is such a federating thing. It's just something that brings everybody together. So I think I can bring some testimonies from the field.
Very good. All right, gentlemen, let us start with this idea. We wouldn't all be here chatting if there wasn't an issue with our food systems. You don't spend an hour convening great voices, great thoughts, without there being an issue. Andrew, you get us started. What do you see being one of the biggest problems with the food systems that you have to work with right now?
Well, I think the overarching issue that we're going to be dealing with for the foreseeable future is our global climate crisis. I think that's the umbrella under which everything sits. Obviously, we need equitable food systems, and I believe we all agree on this panel that there should not be a hungry person in the world because we have the skill technologically to fix that. We can move food around. We can feed people. Do we need to work on distribution systems? Absolutely. Do we need to make sure that economic development, micro farming, home farming, I mean, there's 100 different smaller issues. However, none of them are going to work if we don't address our global climate crisis. So I think that's the most important thing. We can bring electricity and hence refrigeration and other things to places that don't have it. We can create economic development programs in Haiti and let them grow sweet potato vines that, grow a foot a day that are so nutritious. And people like me can teach people to prepare them in healthy ways. But none of that works if, droughts, weather events, climate crisis keeps moving around the world, and where we're now seeing arable land in 5 years we won't, and vice versa. So I see climate as being the number one challenge that we have, and the thing that scares me the most about reaching the 2030 goal.
Lots of nodding heads from your co-panelists, and Martin is making notes. Martin, share your notes with us.
Well, I totally agree with Andrew. If we mess up our global climate, there is just nothing else we can do. That is the absolute top priority. But what I have learned also in the last 1.5 years with this Food Systems Summit is you don't have the choice what crisis you want to address. There's a soil crisis. We are losing arable land at a breathtaking speed. There's a biodiversity crisis in which we are killing more animals, more species every day that possibly can be sustained. We have a climate crisis all over us, and we have inequality and hunger and poverty. We need to fix all of these things together, and that is absolutely doable, and it's just so complicated because our governments, all of our operating system is so in silos and specialists. If we bring that together, what we have tried to do over the last 1.5 years, that's the magic. And I think the magic can really happen on a local level because there the connections are there. You can build it or rebuild it. You can activate communities, and the beauty of food is it's such an emotional topic. It's a connector, it's a combiner, it's something people feel strongly about.
So true. No one can opt out of this conversation. It's not an optional conversation. Folly, I want to tap into your experience in the field, because when we talk about flawed food systems or food systems that need to be fixed, what have you seen in your work in the field? Bring us a story.
Thank you. No, I really was very happy to hear the World Umbrella from Chef Zimmer, but also the World Soil from Dr. Frick. And I come from that realization many years ago with some of our friends, where we basically evolved in this, even as a WFP humanitarian worker, a proud one, to realize that we need to match the challenges of climate change with the challenge of restoring broken landscapes, of fixing livelihoods that are so intricately linked to landscapes, and landscape, soil, biomass, living things, and people are so connected, right? And we can do a lot about that, but it's about going to scale. If we want to offer a response that is commensurate to the scale of climate shocks, they have a dimension, they have a scale. We need to intervene at scale. And there are some countries. My experience in Ethiopia in the late 80s was actually with a group of incredibly dedicated Ethiopians, was to defy what by many was considered as irreversible. And no, we managed to reverse by rehabilitating over 1 million hectares in just 20 years. And then Ethiopians continue, the government, the people today are planting hundreds of millions of trees every single year. This is a story. So from basket case, they became bread baskets in a number of locations. And the same is happening now in the Sahel. You will be amazed. I mean, I saw the video before, and there were some pics actually of the sites that we began implementing in 2018 after our executive director visited the Niger country, and then later on to Burkina and Mali, etc. And it was amazing how just in 3 years, over 200,000 acres of completely crusted, degraded land was back to life, producing fodder, producing food, getting water tables replenished, home garden, over 1,000 home garden for women groups and youth, giving that energy. The youth has energy to get into jobs, green jobs, but also, to build on what Chef Zimmer say, get green diets, green minds, green businesses. We need to get there and get fast. But 60% of the population being below 25, that energy is unique. I'm talking about sub-Saharan Africa here. It's for the world. It's a recipe for everyone. But that is what the experience is telling me. These countries are not defeated. Those environments can produce food for schools, for better nourishment for children. And it is a call for partnership. It's amazing to see how partners are coming together to converge in some of these places. UNICEF, FAO, over hundreds NGOs, and government institutions, local universities. Anyway, later on maybe we can expand some of those.
Andrew, you have been to Ethiopia. You understand the food chain there, food systems there from your experience, from your travels. Tell us one example that really exemplifies what we're talking about today, the challenges that we have right now from Ethiopia.
Well, it's a fascinating example. Addis Ababa, Ethiopia's capital city, I believe still has the largest open air market in all of Africa. I've been there multiple times, and it's crushingly sad to see a near mountain of tomatoes. We've documented this on camera. This is simple fact. Bigger than me, a circle 40 feet in diameter, clearly from a giant 18-wheeler that just unloaded, unbasketed tomatoes onto the ground for people to pick up and purchase. I am all for ugly food. I don't believe we need to be buying pristine food from Western markets. I believe in the power of eating ugly food. Often it tastes better, and most of the food grown in the world is ugly. However, what we need to fix in Ethiopia isn't their land. There's a mythology out there that says it's a country that can't grow their own food. That's not true. Some of the richest soil in the world is in Ethiopia, right? What they need is more electricity and an infrastructure that will allow for development of a distribution system. Now, the solutions that we need to employ in a country like Ethiopia to allow Ethiopians to help feed themselves is different than one that we might put in place in Namibia, is different than one that we might put in place in the Sahel or in Haiti or in some other environment. It's fascinating to listen to my colleagues talk about the same issues using different languages, and it all coming down to micro communities. We don't need one global leader, one global solution. This is a system that requires 14, 15 different solutions. And the only way to do that is community by community by community. I believe in the indomitable nature of the human spirit. I am a positive person. I do believe this is fixable. What scares me is the speed with which we need to act. And sadly, especially in the West, we have two problems. One, we have the skill, but we don't have the political will to make those changes. And the second issue that I think needs to be thrown out on the table is what used to be called in the 80s and 90s NIMBY, not in my backyard.
Not in my
right?
backyard,
So
yeah.
we would see pictures of emaciated children of color from Africa going way back to my childhood on TV, on commercials, and everybody would be asked to send $1 in to a different NGO or organization helping people. And the fact was that in the West, people were like, well, that's happening to people of color half a world away. Speaking honestly about America and just looking at what our political will has been, people of color half a world away don't deserve our attention if you look at our actions. I believe everyone in the world is equal, and we need to be helping all of them. And now that those problems are in America, I think it's changing some of that not in my backyard thinking. With COVID in America, we dropped 20% of people that were above the poverty line below it. Hunger is not just happening in the countries that Voli was talking about. It's happening in the neighborhood I live in. It's just stigmatized to the point that people want to stuff that down. Just like the climate crisis, hunger is pervasive. It's in every community in the world. And if we don't start treating each other equally, I think we're going, and going community by community, I think the problem is going to get worse and worse, and we're going to see more situations like the one in Ethiopia. I hope and pray that the Electrify Africa Act that took care of the southwestern corner of that country, one that I was involved in many years ago with helping to get bipartisan support for that legislation, increases in other parts of the world where we need a grid.
Gentlemen, I offered you up to our audience so that they could ask you questions. Martin, help me out with this one. This one comes from Katrina. Katrina, I love this question. Could the panelists unpack specifically what the climate crisis and global food systems have to do with equity and equality? Martin, you go first with that question.
Well, awful lot. I give you two numbers, and these are shocking numbers. One is you have altogether 4.5 billion people who are depending from food systems for their livelihoods. We all depend on food, of course, but to make a living, 4.5 billion people live on food systems. 3 billion people, that's almost half of the people on this planet, do not have access to nutritious food because they are too poor. And to Andrew's point, that is in every rich country exactly the same. Our poor are overweight and obese. Why? Because they eat crap food. But climate change is impacting on the food chain. And wherever in the world you are, the poorest, most dangerous, most undesirable jobs, unfortunately, are in food systems. It's the fruit pickers, it's the people working in meat processing, and so on. So food is also a massive problem about equity. We don't pay enough to the people along the value chain. There are tremendous power imbalances between big companies and small people who basically have nothing else to sell than their labor. And this is being exacerbated by climate change. I don't want to fire too many numbers, but if you consider that 80% of the food insecure people of this planet are actually food producers, you see the full irony of that. So the people who grow food are hungry. That's obviously wrong and needs to be fixed. And climate change here is just exacerbating an existing situation. It makes it even more difficult, such as COVID, climate change. It's pushing people over the edge. And often it's, as they would say in the Arab world, it's the hair that breaks the camel's back.
I agree with Martin 100%. I got to jump in here. I agree with Martin 100%, and everything he said is important. I would have one friendly amendment to that. I live in the central northern part of the United States of America, and I can tell you without a doubt that over the last year and a half, directly attributed to climate crisis, and by the way, traveled to 172 countries over the last 25 years making television, I can tell you that when climate change and climate crisis, as it increasingly every year grips our planet, there's fewer fish, there's fewer vegetables being grown, it's harder to move them from one area to another. We've seen volatility here in Minnesota because of our weather pattern shifting, where we are, planting later in the season, experiencing heavier rains in September than ever before, lowering the amount of apples that are produced. Therefore, the cost of apples goes up. So when you add that to all of the people who are below the poverty line, they can't afford fresh fruit. The largest oyster bed in the world was in Apalachicola, Florida, 40 years ago. Now they are producing 0 wild oysters. 0. Simply because the water has become too saline because of climate change. So consequently, you see oysters now costing 3-4 times what they did at the retail level, but because of the poverty issues, companies are still paying oystermen 1975, 1980 revenues. So it doesn't matter what business, what food product, or where in the world, we are seeing a class issue develop where those can afford to eat can eat because they can cope with the rising cost of food, and it becomes more and more expensive to feed the hungry.
Absolutely.
Panel, we have so many comments and questions for you about how do we fix this, some ideas. I want to run them by you. But first, let me give you and share with your audience one potential solution help improve our food systems, make them more equitable. And that is the WFP Stop the Waste campaign. It's really simple. You take action so that you're not throwing away so much food, you're using your food more productively. The money that you save, it will be a lot, okay? The money that you save, you then donate to the World Food Programme USA. It's a win-win situation. Let's take a look at the campaign. Gentlemen, you've all made very compelling cases for our food systems being flawed. I'm going to push you along a little bit more now and then talk about then how do we fix them? How do we improve them? So we've got more equitable food systems, affordable, healthy food for everybody around the world. Volley, I'm going to start with a question for you. This question comes from Robert. Robert asks, what can be done to enhance food security in impoverished sub-Saharan countries that do not have the rich soil of Ethiopia and limited access to water? Volley, would you mind taking that one on, please?
With great pleasure. It's a very good question. First of all, we need to understand that the Sahel and arid and semi-arid lands are not zero rainfall, right? So at the end of the day, it's going to catch the water, catch the water if we can, is to trap it and deposit where you need it. And to safe dispose excess water that may come in torrential ways, because what also characterizes Sahel is little rain, but very badly distributed over time and space. They come down like a crack of the whip. And they tend to, in 3 or 4 good, useful showers, exhaust basically 70% of the rainy season. So there are techniques to really fix those landscapes, to first collect the water, moisture, then beginning this slow process of rebuilding a little bit of biomass, recycling, composting as we made that available and possible in many of these contexts. Last year, only in Niger, 50,000 tons of compost were produced by local smallholder farmers, right? Using these very simple techniques, but also enabling water to stay and to multiply. We call it rainfall multipliers. We use part of the area as a serving area, as a reservoir to feed water into the area that we have these half moons to collect them. And it's beautiful technology. It's very ancient. It goes back to 2,000 years. But it has been adopted and fixed and refixed. And we try to combine with indigenous knowledge, because often we don't ask local people there about their innovation. We hear a lot about, very high level things and so on. But down there are countless innovations. The Zai pit system from a farmer, his name is Sawadogo, was invented 40 years ago in his plot. It's a simple pit where he dug and he observes the behavior of termite that recycle organic matter. So he started rebuilding completely his environment by digging those pits. People laughed at him. Now, 40 years later, he's a legend in his country. He's a champion of environmental sustainability. He won the award as a land award in 2019, and his technology is applied throughout Africa in all arid lands, okay, in hundreds of thousands of hectares. And we combined. I was privileged to meet Sawadogo a while ago in Burkina Faso, and to really see what kind of ideas. He's over 80 years old, and that indigenous technology could be applicable mixing with modern technologies as well. We have digital farms for irrigated mechanisms. We have new ways to harness a more complex environment, because dealing with those broken landscapes needs also a professional level. And I go back to the need to engage local universities, deploying those talents out there that can really tackle with local solution their problems. Okay, I'm getting very passionate about that. But you would be surprised to see some of the 170 students that got their Master 2 degree just in the last couple of years. What they were able to do in those communities by learning and getting their energy back.
Gentlemen, I am not going to let you leave this conversation before you give me at least one each very concrete example of either solutions that you are seeing, that you're involved in, or that you feel are incredibly necessary to reform our food systems. Martin, would that be the Food Systems Summit? Is that part of the reform of our food systems? Will you talk about that a little bit?
I think the idea of it, and I'm very happy that Woli mentioned Yakubu Savodogu, whom I met 10 years ago. And, if there's one thing I can say, there's a YouTube video called The Man Who Stopped the Desert. It's about the man. Watch it. It's really fantastic to see. And, this example is exactly answering your question. We need to empower the little people. We need to empower the people on the ground. So it starts by listening. What you just said, there are indigenous technologies which we have forgotten but can really help. If you think that 80% of the biodiversity we still have is on land managed by indigenous peoples, so obviously they have to teach us something. If you look at the wildfires in the United States and the western part of it, there is indigenous methodology to manage the forest that the fuel is not accommodating. So there is a lot to be learned, and it starts with the humbleness that you don't have the solution. And I personally also don't believe in the big techno fixes to solve humanity. It's in the many little solutions that are different and adapted. And on an individual level, nothing is more satisfying and gratifying than growing a bit of your food yourself. And there's always a space. It can be an old box, it can be the garden of your local church, whatever your reference frame is, you will always find a space to do a bit of gardening. And it's only good. There are examples of inner cities where people grow food just for fun and put it at the disposition of people who couldn't afford that. So there's a basket of apples. Help yourself. There's fresh vegetable, there's salad. And this is really hands-on helping people, and it's a lot of fun and brings communities together.
So many conversations from our viewers. Thank you so much. Thank you for being part of the panel as well. Okay, this comment, I'm going to give this one to you, Chef. Jackie says, we have minimized food waste in our home, but when I go to a grocery store and see food being thrown out, I can't help but think the US has to change this policy and allow for food that can be donated. Thoughts, Andrew?
Well, she's spot on. This is where we have the obvious skill to do it. That is a very, very simple solution. People have to remember, my colleagues have talked about the extraordinary amount of food waste that goes on globally. Speaking for here in America, 40% of food is wasted. The vast majority of that is pre-consumer contact. And one of the big places that this occurs is in the field, or the two big places in the field, where we don't have enough people to pick the food, move the food, plant the food, turn over the soil that we have, and at the wholesale and retail level, where we are obsessed with this idea of perfect food. In order to make the changes, the very obvious changes that we need, just to have that food donated and picked up, state by state in America, we have different laws, even within different municipalities, about what type of food can be picked up, how it should be stored, and how it should be doled out. Some of those laws are antiquated. They were created at a time where we didn't have the technology to protect people from getting sick, keeping hot food hot, cold food cold, etc. But we also didn't have distribution points. We now have food rescue organizations. I'm on the board of several of them. And the good ones are trying to create a national, a system that can be replicated nationally, but we still need to change laws in this country to allow for those things to happen. A lot of those are municipal and statewide laws. It speaks to community. It's not that big swing that Martin was talking about, ignoring. I'm with him 100%. Sure, someone is going to come up with some sort of genius idea that, a small machine that can be planted everywhere. But we already have a very inexpensive plastic tower where people don't even need real soil to be grown, where we can recirculate gray water, and we can put that we have the financial capability of putting one of those in every single home around the world. We just don't have the political will to do it. It's absolutely shocking to me. I've started to use the phrase culinary genocide because I think by definition, if you have the solution and you're condemning people to poor outcomes, I know that's a really scary word to use, but what other word is there to describe the almost criminal nature of ignoring these very, very simple solutions? I will tell you, at supermarkets, what is very, very, very important and an easy solution for people who want to get active is to simply write down a couple of notes of what they heard today on this panel and send it to their entire list on their email list, on their laptop, computer, phone, whatever you have, and send that in to your local politicians and demand change. Volunteer 1 hour of your time. It doesn't even have to be at a place. You can do it safely from your computer and help spread the message and start to be an advocate for change. If we don't make those small changes, community by community, starting in places like our supermarkets and with our municipal and statewide laws about food waste, we are going to be stuck in the same position that we're in a year, 2 years, 3 years from now, and that is absolutely petrifying to me.
I'm just thinking, Voli, about the mission of the World Food Programme over the past 60 years. How are we and how are you today looking at improving food systems and making them more equitable? How important a part of your work is that?
No, thank you for the question. It's a very important perspective to have. I think food systems bring, Dr. Frick said before, break silos, right? So we need to think, first of all, there is a mindset shift here, breaking silos. Food system is across the board. We can enhance food systems by even responding to the most severe emergencies. For instance, to give you an example, just last year, in spite of COVID, as an organization, thanks to the generosity of a lot of donors, including the US, in particular, I must say, we managed to buy around 2.1 million tons of food just by injecting in the market, in the local market, local regional markets, close to $1 billion. So this money was just this local and regional procurement effort from countries like Sudan, Uganda, South Africa, Tanzania, Nigeria, and many others, Ethiopia, even Niger. There are surpluses. It's helping small orders linked to markets. So we try now to improve the value chains, do value chain assessments, trying to understand markets better and trying to get better prices at the level of the smallholders. That's one action. The second one is, as Chef Zimmer was saying, investing in integrated resilience packages with partners in those communities, community by community. At the end of the day, solutions are there at the very bottom. Having dialogues, having at least 3 or 4 key activities that relieves hardships. You can't believe the amount of hardships, particularly on the shoulders of women. People tend to forget these 2 big categories, youth and women. Okay, they are the pillars of our food system sustainability, and just by having even better access to land tenure rights, to having access to just few years of security in tenureship is hugely important for people. And I'm speaking for our clients, for our beneficiaries largely. I understand, in our own countries as well, but in those places, we're really talking about food systems that often are living on one single crop in agroecologically depleted landscapes where biodiversity is over, and that one single crop is infested very quickly by pest and disease, it doesn't store very well, it expires very quickly, it perishes very fast, it can even be toxic, like with aflatoxins and other stuff. So we need to get better in investing a comprehensive package, at least of few activities. I'm not saying all of them, that can send the child to school, can nourish a mother and the child, can fix those broken landscapes, as with some of these very simple yet not simple in the sense that they're simple, but not, they're quite complicated to do it well, right? And we need a professionalization of this type of work. And yeah, more boots on the ground, and enabling institutions, enabling our partners, particularly governments, to be there on the ground. And they can be there on the ground. It's just that we need to do a better job in really having a major build-up of capacities and investments as partners together in the same communities, as opposed to scattered a lot. Because some of my colleagues, and I remember vividly a lady minister of environment in one of those Sahel countries, that say, Mr. Carucci, we have a lot of frameworks, we have a lot of theories of change. We want more practice for change, and we want you to accompany us in those communities where we need to fix the problem. So the Food System Summit, and Dr. Kalibata said very well, one thing, it is a call for action, right? And so I'd start from the lower level to bring it up, but I think we can do it, and there are amazing opportunities out there. The strengths
And,
of people in those areas is phenomenal.
and that action is different in Madagascar than it is in Munich,
Totally
than it is
different.
in Milan,
Totally different.
than it is in Minnesota. And that's why the community-based organizations and listening to the people that live there is going to help improve those things. You mentioned schools. One thing that we haven't talked about, it's very important here in America, is we have so many hungry children. A national school lunch program that allows kids to eat breakfast, lunch, and if needed, take home food for dinner from their school 12 months a year, not just 9 months a year, is something that's extremely important. That is one small change, one small piece of legislation that only costs a couple $2 billion a year. We waste more than that when we build 2 of these stealth bomber airplanes. It's galling to me that we haven't been able to make that change, but the solutions are different, and we have them. That's the ironic, the nauseatingly ironic problem.
No, you're right. All hands on deck.
Sorry. I would like to add to that. I totally agree that, as many regions we have, as many food systems we have. But I think there's one thing in common that we need to change. We need to look at our farmers not only as food producers. We need to look at them as the people who are basically managing our life support system. And if you were in the International Space Station and somebody would fiddle with the water filtration system or with the oxygen, the CO2 scrubbing, you would immediately stop. Well, these people are our farmers. And if we start to honor that, and maybe also honor in a financial sense, if they are doing the right agricultural practices, and we start see them as water managers, as firemen and women who basically prevent forest fires, as biodiversity stewards, as atmospheric managers keeping climate change in check, then we would have a totally different relationship, and we would mobilize a lot more money to actually these production systems, as they are totally vital. And I think we are still believing that we can do whatever we want to this planet, and somehow miraculously it will continue to function. While all the scientists really scream at us in unison that this is now code red for humanity, and that it's really 5 years left, and that is it.
And we also have the same issue with farm workers. I mean, we profiled farm workers in the Salinas Valley in central California. And the one thing that I was stunned by was that what everybody considers to be easy manual labor was in fact each of the different pickers in this strawberry field, when we interviewed them in the show, was doing hydrology reports. They were taking stock of how much they were picking on the same rows, not only every week, but also season by season. And it was their information and data that was being crushed on the computers, on the laptops of the people back at home base at these companies, back at their headquarters. The people on the ground, the farmers, were losing them at an extraordinary rate. And if we don't start bringing more people, at least into this country, who understand how to farm, and if we continue to look at food and farms that are raising food and for human consumption, sadly we classify those in America as specialty crops, we're going to keep perpetuating this cycle of diminished value. I agree 100% with Martin. You know, like teachers and first responders, our farmers globally are our livelihood. We need to be supporting them. That's where the money needs to go. We shouldn't be taking from them and pushing them down. We need to be elevating them and listening to what they have to say. It was farmers that told me about the apple crisis in Minnesota and the rainfall, holding up logbooks from central Minnesota that were 100 years old, where they were recording rainfall every single day of the growing season, and could show me that in the last 20 years they had a problem. Fishermen on the Great Lakes who told scientists that the ice was leaving the Great Lakes one day earlier every single year, therefore killing off fish that required the ice to keep the larger fish still sleeping and not moving around and eating the microorganisms that the little baby fish needed to eat. So now we have no more perch in the Great Lakes in the United States. Those perch have moved north into Canada. We are absolutely in possession of the knowledge, and we have to support the people that have it, and those are our farmers.
In the final 15 minutes of our conversation, our audience is already taking us in this direction. What can we do? What is the call to action? So there are lots of what can we do questions. Let me start with this one. I'm going to put this one to all of you, gentlemen. So I want you all to chip in. It's from Anne-Marie. Thanks for the question, Anne-Marie. There seems to be a dilemma in the food supply system. On one hand, I want to buy local because of environmental and climate considerations. On the other hand, buying imported fruits and vegetables from overseas countries helps their economies. What does the panel think? Consume local or global? I'm going to start with the least obvious person first. Volley. Local or global?
I am more of a global. I'm more of a global. Both need to be connected. I mean, I just came across 2 weeks ago a company that does biscuits. I don't going to advertise for that company, but it's connected. The cocoa that is part of the biscuit is connected to an association in Ghana and in Ivory Coast that actually makes it organic, have a fair price, and it is environmentally savvy on other things. So it's that kind of thing that we are seeing. It's like now the palm oil not from plantations that are flattening Indonesia forests, right? It's that kind of connection between local and global that needs to happen, and that connection will go fast because adoption of technology in many of those so-called faraway places, is very fast. And the same can apply with many other products. In dyes and gums, for example, that fruit trees like Balanitis aegyptiaca, like baobab, all the perfumes, creams, and stuff like that. I mean, it's countless. But we need to learn about those, and we need to make those connections. And people may be surprised that WFP is taking quite a close look at this, but we belong to those contexts, right? Because we are there. So we seize those opportunities. And when we don't have the skills, we call for somebody else to help us. So there are, we need more partnerships. We need more actionable partnership and partnership that actually go down there, and stay. It's to really to rehabilitate, to restore, to replenish, and to replicate.
I know Andrew's bursting to tell us his take on this, but I'm going to make him wait till last. Martin, local or global?
That's really, and coming back to Andrew's point, there is no one size fits all. I'm obviously talking to you from the European Union. I had a fascinating debate, and it was about As a Dutch, do you buy your tomatoes produced in the Netherlands, where you have them in a greenhouse that needs to be heated, and that obviously costs energy? Or do you import that from Spain, obviously a sun-rich country? Now, if you get them from Spain, you actually have them watered by pumps who are pumping groundwater from 150 meters down. So if you look at every single product, there is no simple answer. But I think a couple of things are just obvious. If you have a local choice, well, support your local farmer. If you do an apple pie, get your local apples and try to get a variety of apples that is not within the big six that you find in every supermarket. You will have difficulties finding cinnamon coming out of the US, but I would highly recommend US cinnamon to be a part of the apple pie. But if you buy this cinnamon, well, spend a couple of cents extra and get fair traded one. Ask questions. I mean, this is also Andrew's point. Go to your supermarket and ask questions. Be a pain in the neck. Insist, if more people ask questions, and then, change is happening. People understand that price is one consideration. But we got so obsessed, and all the marketing culture got so obsessed by tiny little advantages. If you go to a big coffee chain and you buy some fancy coffee, let's say for $4, the producer typically gets 3 cents. Well, if you give the producer 6 cents, that still makes it a $4 cappuccino. You don't even feel that as a consumer. But these 3 cents mean a doubling of the income of the farmer. And that can mean that the daughter can go to school and to university and all the chain. We are so used to penny pinching and pushing every bit of profit out, because that's what you learn in business school. And people rarely consider what actually the human consequences of that is. So you can still be in business and you can still make good business without killing people on the other side of the value chain.
Chef, I feel this question is a little bit like the boxers or briefs question of today, right? So shop local or shop global?
I think my esteemed colleagues have hit every nail on every head. There's not much that I would add to that. Maybe just to motivate people a little more to understand what they're buying. I'll give you a couple other examples that weren't necessarily talked about. We've become obsessed with, for those that can afford to eat, we have become obsessed with different types of healthy foods here in America, most notably things like almonds and avocados. While we're going through these huge water crises, freshwater crises all over the world, in the age of the climate crisis, where we have a clicking talk, according to the UN report that came out 5-6 weeks ago, of devastating proportions, maybe it would be wiser to eat foods that didn't require such a huge multiple of water to deliver a portion of the food, right? Yeah. We were talking before about reading labels and making sure that you're buying food that is fair trade. Fair trade on everything is allowed. I'm very particular about my spices. I'm not a big fan of certain types of domestic spices. They don't work for me in my food, and I will confess, I'm part of the problem. I'm a pleasure seeker, right? If I wasn't, I would be eating a food replacement like Soylent 21 meals a week. But I do think if we're better shoppers, if we're more informed, if we start to take a meal or two from the wild, that could mean growing your own once a week. If we skip a meal once a week, we've learned that intermittent fasting is actually good for us, right? Skip a lunch, use a couple of meal replacements that are healthy and good for you. Check with your doctor first. Obviously, children and older adults who are compromised medically should not be doing this. But if we start to put less pressure on our food system, that helps tremendously as well. I think you should be buying local wherever possible and accenting that with smart choices from the global food community, because it is a vital piece of the pie. I'll finish with one big challenge to this that I'm sure everyone who's listening is saying, oh, Zimmern, I'm not sure I can do that. And that is, we have to change our culture. We have to change our culture. When you travel around the world, it's only the American plate that has 14 ounces of protein in the middle of it, like a half a chicken or a whole trout or some giant-sized piece of beef on the grill, big pile of starch, big pile of green vegetable. We're actually eating the wrong way. One of the things we can learn when we look at all the global cultures and the first peoples, indigenous peoples of the world, with all these solutions that Voli and Martin were talking about, is how they eat. Animal protein is just an accent to everything. There's not a say. I've lived with these indigenous peoples. I've lived with more indigenous peoples than most heads of anthropology departments at teaching universities around the world. Animal protein is an accent to the food that's put in there. They are eating locally. They are eating micro-seasonally. And guess what? Most of them, aside from the modern problems or the other issues that we have brought by pushing modernity onto some of these ancient peoples, are extremely healthy and long living and happier. So when you look at some of the diets around the world, it's not just the Mediterranean diet that gets all the pub, right? It's when you look at the global diet, increase in beans and farinaceous foods that are also very inexpensive to grow and inexpensive to ship and are so good for you. Everyone should be making a pot of beans every week and eat 3-4 meals off of those. We can literally, we have the power to transform our system. We just don't have the cultural will to do it. We have to, and again, I'm part of the problem. I fetishize, as part of my job, I can be seen as fetishizing food that is for the rich, that is too food focused for people who are hobbyists or who can afford to do it. And what I'm trying to change is lowering that and increasing the amount of one bowl meals, humble meals. We've just posted a bunch of stuff on my Instagram about, you know, lentil soups and bean soups and things that you can make big pots of and live off of inexpensively. Things that I learned by eating in foreign countries. So we have to open our eyes and ears and we have to read those labels. We live in 2021. We can't just shut the door on bringing in fruits and vegetables from overseas, but we can do it smartly and buy from, look at the fair trade coffee issue. It's been very beneficial in the fincas, the farms.
I have to say, we've got a lot of applause on the chat section for Martin saying, well, you're already paying over $4 for a cup of coffee. Pay a couple of cents more and buy fair trade. And there was a standing ovation to your coffee remark. All right, gentlemen, just to recap, the future of hunger and food systems, that connection, making our food systems more equitable, more affordable. I will give you 1 minute each and not a second more for your call to action. Martin, what is yours?
It's a very simple one. Cook for your friends. Don't eat alone. Invite people. Take time and love to prepare because it connects you. It's good for your health. It's good for your mental health. And it's good for the planet. And it's just a very, very human thing to do.
Voli, what is your call to action as part of the WFP?
Is to invest in those places where people may think it's not perhaps worth investing. Actually, it is the first area that will demand our collective support. We have hundreds of millions of people, as Martin was saying before, that are waiting for a partnership, a relationship, and a learning, for what Zimmer was saying. We need to learn from them as much as the other way around. But stay and invest in food systems, linking the dots. And that's basically all. Those areas can be rewarding, can regreen, can produce food for the planet for a very long time. As WFP, we are committed to make our role.
I would insist that people memorize what my two colleagues just said. We all win when we all win. It is worth investing in other people. And obviously, I have based my entire career on what Martin said, expanding our table. As my friend Chef Jose Andres always says, we need bigger tables. I think the one thing that I would add is we have to be awareness raisers and advocates in our community. I was thrilled to hear everybody applauded what Martin had to say. I want everyone who's passionate about those issues to spread the word that there's fair trade, not just in coffee, but in a whole list of thousands of ingredients around the world, from olive oil to asparagus to plums from Chile and Paraguay. So I would encourage people to spread the news to everyone they can and encourage all of their community to be an advocate for change.
Andrew, Martin, Rolly, I have just experienced the best hour of this week, and I've had a pretty exciting week. Thank you so much for your time, for being part of this WFP USA virtual conversation series. Really appreciate you. We were making notes. Audience, I really appreciate your questions, your comments, for following us for the last hour. If you take a look at your email box, your inbox, quite shortly you should get a very brief survey. I know you get so many surveys. This one's a very brief one. Give us some feedback. What did you like about this conversation? Any thoughts about this conversation? Please share them in the brief survey. And now my job is done. Thanks for spending an hour with the WFP USA. Take care, everybody. See you next time.